now be taking a look at the Black Corporation ISE-NIN Voice and Expander Eurorack modules. It's a single voice version of the original ISE-NIN, which is an 8-voice polyphonic analog synthesizer in desktop format. The ISE-NIN was influenced and modeled after the Roland Jupiter 8. Alex Ball did a great detailed comparison video on YouTube between the ISE-NIN and an original Jupiter 8, as well as an MKS-80, aka Super Jupiter rack synth. The results were very close in sound between the ISE-NIN and its vintage predecessors. The voice module is 36 HP and the expander is 22 HP. Combined, that's a total of 58 HP, which is quite a bit of real estate, but that buys you a lot more flexibility when it comes to external modulation and routing options. Let's take a look at the voice module. Starting from the upper left corner is the VCO modulator section, which begins with the LFO fader to adjust the amount of LFO control over the VCOs. Envelope 1 fader controls the amount that envelope 1 affects the pitch of the VCOs. Then next to that is a switch to route the LFO to VCO 1, VCO 2, or both VCOs if the switch is in the center position. Next is the pulse width modulation fader, with a switch to determine whether it is controlled via LFO manually with the fader or by the envelope 1 ADSR controls. Next are the VCO1 controls, which include a cross modulation fader to control the pitch of VCO1 modulated by VCO2, a switch for the octave range with 4 octave settings, and another switch to set the waveform between triangle, sawtooth, pulse width, or square wave. Next is the VCO2 section, starting with a switch which, when turned on, will sync the frequency of VCO1 and VCO2 to the same pitch. Next is a switch between VCO audio rate or a lower LFO frequency rate. Then there are the faders for pitch range, which is quantized in half steps. Then a fader for fine-tuning, and a switch to set the waveform between sine, sawtooth, pulse width, or white noise. Down to the second row, we start with a mix fader, which controls the balance between VCO1 and VCO2. There is a high-pass filter fader, which can reduce the amount of low frequencies. Next is the VCF section, starting with the cutoff frequency fader, followed by a resonance fader, then a switch to set the filter slope to -12 dB or -24 dB. Then there is an envelope modulation fader, which controls the intensity of the VCF. The switch next to it routes it to either envelope 1 or envelope 2. The LFO modulation fader engages modulation from the LFO section on the third row. The keyboard fader sets the amount of keyboard input signal. The VCA section has a fader to set the amount. Envelope 2 affects the VCA, followed by an LFO switch that sets the intensity of the LFO on the VCA. In the interface section, there are 2 inputs, one for control voltage with a global tuning knob above it. The next input is for gate signals to trigger the envelopes with a portamento/glide knob above. Then there is one output for the volume with a knob above it to control the level. On the third row, we start with the LFO section. First is a fader to control the frequency rate. Then there's a fader to delay the start of the modulation. Then a switch to set the waveform between sine, sawtooth, square, and random. Next is envelope 1, with 4 faders for attack, decay, sustain, and release. Next to that is a keyboard switch to enable envelope amount source levels to increase as lower keys are played on the keyboard. Then a switch that can invert the polarity of the waveform. Finally, envelope 2 has another set of faders for ADSR and one switch to enable envelope source levels to increase as lower keys are played on the keyboard. Next, we'll take a look at the Breakout expander module. So the ISE-NIN Breakout expander module has 28 inputs and 21 outputs. If we're starting off with the input section, we have an LFO rate input, which sets the frequency of the LFO. Then we have a LFO delay, which sets delay time before the LFO takes effect. An LFO to oscillator, which affects the oscillator pitch. And then we have the LFO to low-pass filter, which affects the low-pass filter. On the second row, envelope 1, attack, decay, sustain, release. On the third row, envelope 2, attack, decay, sustain, release. Then on the fourth row, we have a VCO1 frequency input, then a VCO2 frequency input, then we have VCO1 frequency modulation input and VCO2 frequency modulation input. And on the fifth row, we start with VCO2 range. Then we have a VCO1 and 2 cross mix. Then a pulse width modulation input. Then we have a cross modulation input. And then on the sixth row, we have envelope 1 input that affects the VCO pitch. And then we have envelope 2 to VCA input that affects the VCA amount. And then the third is the envelope 1 to low-pass filter input. And then we have a fourth input that controls the amount of keyboard tracking that affects the low-pass filter. On the last row, seventh row, we have a high-pass frequency cutoff frequency input. Then we have a low-pass frequency cutoff frequency input. And then we have a resonance input. Then finally we have a VCF input that allows you to use an external signal. So for the next section, we're going to look at the outputs. There's first row has VCO1 triangle wave. Then we have VCO1 sawtooth. Then we have the VCO1 pulse wave. And then on the second row, we have a sine wave from VCO2. VCO2 sawtooth. And then VCO2 pulse wave. Then on the third row, we have the high frequency white noise. Then low frequency pink noise. And we have a mix of VCO1 and VCO2. So whatever you have selected on the voice module will affect the output of this VCO mix. Then we have the LFO sine. Let's turn this off. So this is the envelope 1 output. Then there's a high pass output. And then we have a LFO saw. Envelope 1 inverted. Low pass filter at -12. We have a low frequency oscillator output of square wave. And we have an envelope 2 output. Then a low pass frequency output at -24 dB. And we have a LFO random output. and an envelope to inverted output. Finally, we have a headphone output, which can be useful if you don't have an audio output jack.